Shalom, Kal Halayim, La Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham Rucha HaKodash. Double honors to the apostles of GMS, Daruwal, and salutations and blessings unto you, elect. All right. The topic of this lesson is, basically Israelite diaspora, right? Or as it says here, the Jewish diaspora. And this is from pbs.org, right? So I'm just going to get into it. Let me see. I'm going to start with down here. It says, hold on. So I'll just start at the top. It says, when we see the Christians beginning to spread out beyond their original homeland environment, they're following a pathway that had already been well trod before them by other Jews. By the middle of the first century, there are probably more Jews living outside of the homeland than actually live back in Judah proper. This is what we call the diaspora. This is the dispersion of the Jewish population throughout the empire. And we know that there are major Jewish communities in most of the large cities of the empire, all the way from the Persian Gulf on the east to Spain on the west. It's an extensive diffusion of the Jewish population throughout Rome. So what was the relationship like between Jews and these other communities where they found themselves? And these Jewish communities in the diaspora environment face a number of challenges. How do you maintain your traditional Jewish identity and piety while at the same time fitting into the social and cultural traditions of Greek and Roman cities? In some localities, we find Jews participating in the theater or normal aspects of daily life. In other cities, we find Jews experiencing oppression and seeming to distance themselves from the local environment. So it varies from city to city on what the Jewish experience would be. On the whole, however, Judaism in the diaspora was able to accommodate a great deal of Hellenistic culture, right? And that history you can read about in the books of the Maccabees, so you can understand what's happening in Matthew's, right? Luke, Romans, Acts, right? The epistles, right? Because there was a big division, right? And for the most part, what I'm reading so far is Israelites knowing they're Israelites, right? And they're living in other, territories and speaking those languages like Latin and Greek, right? But you also had many Israelites that didn't know they were Israelites, and that's what I just started to read into, right? They accommodate a great deal of Hellenistic culture. The normal language for Jews in the diaspora was Greek. It was in the diaspora that the Bible was translated from Hebrew into a Greek vernacular. So later on, when we find Paul quoting scriptures, he's not quoting the Hebrew Bible. He may not even know the Hebrew Bible directly. He quotes the Bible in Greek. Well, Paul knew Hebrew, he knew the Torah. He came up as a Pharisee, so he was a very learned man. But he also he had Roman citizenship as well, and he used it. So it says here, Jewish population in Rome and Ostia. There are very large Jewish communities in some of the major Roman cities. Rome itself seems to have something on the order of 10 different synagogue congregations, and the Jewish population of the city of Rome at its zenith was perhaps 100,000. Unfortunately, we have no archaeological evidence of the actual synagogue buildings themselves from the city of Rome, but fortunately a recent archaeological discovery from the nearby port city of Ostia shows one such congregation in its very, very real setting, right? And I guess this is it right here, right? Diaspora Synagogue at Ostia, which is a port city, right? Because Jake always traveled, man. They traded, right? They were merchants and other things, right? Bodyguards and military men. So it says, when you go through the city of Ostia, you're seeing a kind of microcosm of the city of Rome in the first century. it's a little Rome, and as you go down the main street of Ostia and you go out the gate near the harbor down the road, you find a little building just off to the side. As you go in, you find a hall for assembly. From the outside, this building looks like any other along that street. You wouldn't know it's a place of worship for a Jewish community until you go inside and look at the carvings over the arcs that show us a menorah. So, right, clearly that's an Israelite place of worship, right? A synagogue. It says, so here's a Jewish congregation through several generations trying to maintain its life, its identity in a major Roman city. It's interesting that the right adjacent to the hall of assembly is a kitchen and a dining room. Apparently, they too had fellowship dinners. Apparently, they too were engaged in an active social life. So I'm going to skip that part. The catacombs. Here it says the Greek word for diaspora means a scattering, and indeed there was a scattering of Jews throughout the known Greek and Roman world from the 3rd century BC and on down. There's a famous utterance by Strabo, a Greek geographer of the late 1st century BC, who says that you can't go anywhere in the civilized world without encountering a Jew. And that goes into, I was holding this, Acts 2 and 1, right? And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. And that's a Jake thing to say, man. You can't go anywhere in the world because Israelites are scattered throughout the 4 corners of the earth, man. Right? And they're the salt of the earth. Right? Verse 2, and suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of a rushing mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared unto them cloven tongues like as of fire, and it sat upon each of them, and they were all filled with the Holy Ghost, and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, right? Israelites that knew they were Israelites, devout men, right? Out of every nation under heaven. Now, when this was noised abroad, the multitude came together and were confounded, because that every man heard them speak in his own language. So these were Israelites from different lands, and it's going to name the different lands. And they were all amazed and marveled, saying one to another, Behold, are not all these which speak Galileans? And how hear we every man in our own tongue wherein we were born? Parthians and Medes, right? Medes is Japheth's land, which is a little bit northeast, right? Parthians and Elamites, which is who East Indians, and the dwellers in Mesopotamia, right? The Chaldeans, right? The ancient land of the Babylonians, and in Judea and Cappadocia, in Pontus and Asia, right? Because there was a big scattering in Asia Minor, Phrygia and Pamphylia and Egypt, and in the parts of Libya about Cyrene, and strangers of Rome, Jews and proselytes, Cretes, right? That's an island, and Arabians. We do hear them speak in our tongues the wonderful works of the Most High. So that's what we're reading right now, right? And that was an example of Israelites again that were not in a Hellenized. They were not pretty much Hellenized. It's that they were devout men, right? So they weren't heathens. They knew they were Israelites, right? Right. So he said you can't go anywhere in the civilized world without encountering a Jew. And by his time, this certainly was true. There were large Jewish communities in Egypt, especially in Alexandria, but even throughout the countryside up the Nile Valley. There were large Jewish communities in Syria, a very large one in the city of Antioch, but throughout Syria, and there were numerous Jewish communities throughout Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, just as there were Jewish communities in Greece and throughout the Italian peninsula, most especially, of course, in the city of Rome. Even further west, we know about Jews in southern France and in Marseille, and perhaps even Jews in Spain, right? And again, this is history dealing with Israelites knowing they're Israelites, right? Because you had the Gauls, who later became known, I believe, as the Franks, which is where you get the French from. A lot of those were Israelites, the Scythians, they were Israelites, right? So it's interesting to note that early Christianity first spread in those areas where there was a Jewish presence, interestingly enough. It says that is, hey, just like, all right, First Peter 1:1. Peter, an apostle of Yahushua Mashiach, to the strangers scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, elect according to the foreknowledge of the Most High the Father, through sanctification of the Spirit unto obedience and sprinkling of the blood of Yahushua Mashiach, grace unto you and peace be multiplied. Right? And them strangers, let me see. Well, this is the Greek, right? Because in the Hebrew, right, it basically one who comes from a foreign country into a city or land to reside there by the side of the natives. But the thing is, you had Israelites that left the Holy Land, right? We read that as well, right? They left the Holy Land and they became strangers pretty much. And let me get this. Hold on. Hold on 1 second. Yeah, this is James. This is the one I was thinking of. James 1:1. James, a servant of the Most High and of the Lord Yahushua Mashiach, to the 12 tribes. 12 tribes of what? Elam? Ishmael? No, the 12 tribes of Israel, which are scattered abroad, greeting. Right? When you look up scattered, or hold on. Yeah, scattered. It's diaspora, which was a scattering, a dispersion of Israelites dispersed among foreign nations. So that's interesting, as it says here. It says presumably, the earliest Christian travelers and missionaries like Paul would begin their travels by obviously approaching their brethren, approaching their fellow Jews, and converting some of them to the new path of the new religion, if I may use that word, or the new way of thinking, and perhaps using these communities as springboards from which to get access to the non-Jews in these very areas also. And this is where the split of understanding occurs between Israelites, and the rest of you people, man. Even you other Israelites, you bugged out Jakes, you 2/3, or you elect that are not activated yet. You're not awakened yet. This is where that split of, oh, see, they went to the Gentiles, but you don't even know that those were Israelites themselves, you know. It says it's clear then that the diaspora communities formed the Jewish network which early Christians as Jews were able to use for their own purposes. Right? Now let me go down here, last part, Jewish identity and the diaspora. It says the Jewish way of constructing reality is through the Bible, and the center of gravity is in the Jewish Bible. What pulls the story along is getting to the land of Israel. So the land of Israel, the promise of land to Abraham, the importance of the land, the holiness that goes along with the land is embedded in Jewish historical imagination through the medium of the Bible. And this is Esau's commentary again, It says this means that religiously and socially, any place outside the land is in a sense not home for a Jew, even if Jews can live for generations in other cities. The Jewish designation for territory other than the land of Israel is the diaspora. And by the time of the 1st century, there were probably then as now more Jews living outside of the land of Israel than within the land of Israel. That's a very energetic Jewish population in Babylon. Since the destruction of the first temple, there is a very wealthy, vigorous Jewish population living in the major cities around the Mediterranean. And that population, which is speaking Greek, which is the matrix of the Greek translation of the Jewish Bible, which becomes eventually the seedbed of Christianity to make the idea of Israel available to Greek readers, to liberate it in a sense from its native language. Nonetheless, despite the wide dispersion of Jewish population throughout the Roman Empire, and in the East, Jews are bound together imaginatively and socially by the calendar. That was pretty much it. You know, he mentioned how they have to go to the Holy Land, right, during three high holy days. It says, and therefore, I'm gonna read this part. Therefore, Jewish population in the diaspora would also journey home, even if their actual home was Alexandria or Rome or any place in Asia Minor. Their spiritual home and their historical home was Israel, and specifically Jerusalem, right? And that's true. But anyway, I hope you're edified with that information. I found it pretty insightful. Um, you know, and this is just going into more. I got to go into more about how those other Israelites became Gentiles. Because this was just about, again, Jews, Israelites knowing they're Israelites, but they speak those other tongues, living in those other lands, right? But there's a whole other side to where you had Israelites that didn't know they were Israelites, didn't dress like Israelites, didn't speak Hebrew, didn't understand it, spoke the native tongue of that country, and pretty much did the things of that country, worship the idols and eat the foods and all that. All right, so anyway, Kal Halalim La Yahweh Ba'Hashem Yahushai Ba'Hashem Racha HaKodash, double honors to the apostles of GMS that rule well, who I learned the truth from, and salutations and blessings unto you elect. Shalom.